Well, just 7 weeks away from what was supposed to be a months-long quadruple murder trial, and the man accused of committing those killings has decided a plea deal might be his best option. To avoid the possibility of a death sentence, yesterday we learned Brian Kohberger has apparently agreed to plead guilty to murdering University of Idaho students Kaylee Gonzalez, Ethan Chapin, Xander Kernodle, and Madison Mogan at a rental home near the Moscow campus in November of 2022. And since the news of this deal came to light, a surprise to many, there have been several questions from you and from the victims' families about why the attorneys would agree to this, how it came about at this point in the process, and what this means going forward. Andrea Dearden spoke with Boise attorney Tara Malek, who has seen such situations from both sides as a special assistant U.S. attorney and now a defense attorney, to get some of those answers, including what both sides and the judge have likely been considering for a while.
So I'm sure that both sides really sat with the information that they had and assessed, what their trial strategies were going to be and what the risks were going to be if they proceeded forward. If there are victims involved, like there are in this case, what the victims' desires are and what their hopes are. And then finally, you're looking at what the reality of the situation is. What's your best case scenario if you go all the way through trial? Do you think that you're going to prevail? If you prevail, what happens after that? Is there a likelihood that there will be appeals? And most importantly, is there a plea arrangement that we can come to and a sentence we can come to where we really think that justice is being served and we're holding someone accountable for wrongdoing?
What we believe will be presented tomorrow at that hearing is guilty on all counts. So in that case, it is the best case scenario. We're not dropping any charges, they aren't amending any charges, but full conviction on all four of these. Is that really the best case scenario for prosecutors?
If it's going to be a guilty plea to all four counts, to the 4 counts of murder, the 1 count of burglary, and we're talking about life sentences, no possibility of parole, consecutive life sentences, meaning stacked on top of each other, not happening at the same time, that's a good outcome because you are avoiding the uncertainties of trial. You're avoiding the costs of trial potentially.
You talked about the families being consulted or at least taking into consideration what they may want or their desires. Here we have multiple victims, perhaps families likely that feel differently, have different opinions. So how does that weigh on defense attorneys and prosecutors?
Well, they have to be consulted and kept in the loop. They have victims' rights, they have statutory rights there. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the prosecutors don't represent a single family or a single victim, they represent the state. And so they have to do what is in the best interest of all in this scenario.
Judge Hippler is the presiding judge in this case. He will hear this agreement and does play a role, meaning that he has to accept it. But it's a limited role. So what will he be weighing and what does he really have to decide when it comes down to whether or not to accept this plea agreement?
What I anticipate happening tomorrow at tomorrow's hearing, if it is indeed a plea change hearing, is that the judge is going to engage in what's called a plea colloquy with the defendant. And what that means is he's going to make sure that if a plea is indeed being entered, that it's being done knowingly, voluntarily, that the defendant understands the charges against him, understands the plea agreement in its entirety before accepting that he's not being coerced or forced into making that plea. It's going to be even more imperative that the judge really gets to the heart of making sure that this defendant understands the rights that he is waiving.
That is probably the biggest piece of this plea agreement, or the one that caught my eye, is that he will waive, if what we understand to be true, that he would waive all rights to future appeals. How significant is that and how unusual is it?
Well, it's very significant, especially in this type of case where we were looking at potentially a death penalty case. Death penalty cases, as most people are probably aware, there are lengthy appeals. You could be wrapped up in appeals for decades. There are rights, appeal rights that an accused has, and so it's a significant condition, if it indeed is part of this plea arrangement or agreement, that there's a waiver of those rights. That's a lot of time, it's a lot of cost, it's a lot of uncertainty that goes entirely away.
Now, that hearing for Kohberger to change his pleas to guilty is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock. We would expect to hear all of the conditions laid out in the agreement, and then the next step will be sentencing, which will likely be scheduled weeks or even months from now. And it's during that sentencing that we will have the opportunity to hear all 4 victims' families have the right, the opportunity to address Kohberger, to share how these crimes have affected them. We call those victim impact statements. So they will still have the ability to do that at that sentencing hearing.
And you kind of touched on this with Tara. I know that they're considered, their views and what they want to see happen is considered, but not the ultimate deciding factor. But we know that at least one family is beyond furious, the Gonzalez family, beyond furious with the state of Idaho. Do we know how the other families are feeling about this?
So most of them have been very quiet during this, and we know that that is to protect the case. We understand why that happens. We are understanding that some are relieved, saying that, people close to those families saying that they are relieved to avoid a trial and avoid having to hear all of that evidence and be there. And then, of course, we know that at least one family not happy about the decision.
Yeah, and the other thing that was kind of missing, you said the plea deal, or the appeal, excuse me, is a big part of this, not being able to do that. But another big part of this is the possibility we may never hear a motive for these killings. Is that correct?
Sure. Kohberger could, as the defendant, he also has the right to address the court during that sentencing hearing. But the likelihood that we're going to hear, him express something he did, that would be unheard of. So likely we will never know. Yeah,
it's going to leave a lot of people wondering why. And that's a big piece of this that we're expecting to hear at least part of it, or a reasoning for that in the trial.
Right. Well, as she said, trial doesn't always give us closure.
That's true. All right. Thank you very much, Andrea. Well, in anticipation of your questions about, the cost of prosecuting a death penalty case in Idaho, it's worth noting there isn't a specific answer to that. What we can tell you, according to the Death Penalty Information Center, capital cases can be anywhere from 3 to 5 times more expensive than non-capital cases. The trials are longer, with increased security, and of course, the usual appeals that follow, which on average take a full year longer than non-capital cases. That's according to a 2014 study from the Office of Performance Evaluations here in Idaho, which is a reason why a lot of them don't quite make it that far. In that same study from 2014, they admitted Idaho does not or did not collect enough data to fully account for cost. But they found very few first-degree murder cases in Idaho end in a death sentence, and even fewer end in executing that sentence. From 1998 to 2013, of the 251 people charged with first-degree murder, the death penalty was sought in just 55 of them. That's 22%. A couple others were withdrawn through the trial and the penalty phase, leaving 42 eligible for the death penalty over those years. Just 7 were sentenced to death, and only 2 others since that study was done. Well, since becoming a territory, Idaho has executed 29 men, but the state has completed just 3 executions since 1977. Currently, there are 9 people sentenced to death in Idaho, 8 men and 1 woman. And the most recent addition, Chad Daybell, back in 2024, just last year. And if you take him off the list, Idaho's capital criminals have spent an average of 28 years on death row. The longest at 42 years. That'd be Thomas Creech, who had a failed execution in February of last year and had another scheduled execution stopped in November. So who pays for trying these capital cases? Well, counties bear the brunt of the cost, but they do get some help from the Capital Crimes Defense Fund.